The route that wasn't there. An Ember Circle story. Saturday mornings were supposed to be predictable. Clover had been taking the same bike route to Turning Page's bookstore for 8 months now, and every detail was burned into memory. Left on Maple Avenue, straight past the red mailbox with the dented side, right at the corner where Mrs. Chen always had her coffee shop door propped open, releasing the smell of fresh pastries into the morning air. But today, something felt different. Clover pedaled slower than usual, not because of laziness, but because of a growing sense that something was off. The morning light seemed thicker somehow, more golden than usual for October. And was that street sign always there? Meridian Lane? Clover muttered, braking to a stop. The green street sign swayed gently in a breeze that didn't seem to touch anything else. Clover had lived in this neighborhood for 3 years. There was no Meridian Lane. Maple Avenue dead-ended into Birch Street, which led to the shopping district, where Turning Pages sat wedged between a pizza place and a dry cleaner. But there it was, a street that definitely hadn't existed yesterday. The asphalt looked normal enough. Fresh, actually. Cleaner than the slightly cracked streets Clover was used to. A few houses lined the new street, and they were odd. Not wrong exactly, but like someone had described normal houses from memory and gotten the proportions slightly off. The windows were a little too tall, the rooflines a bit too steep, the front doors painted in colors that somehow seemed both familiar and impossible. "Okay," Clover said aloud, the way people do when they're trying to convince themselves everything is fine. "Maybe I just never noticed it before." But that was ridiculous. Clover noticed everything on the weekend rides. It was the only interesting part of getting to work. Every broken fence slat, every new garden gnome, every car that wasn't usually parked on the street. A sound drifted from down Meridian Lane. Music, but unlike anything Clover had heard before. It wasn't quite instrumental, wasn't quite voices, but something in between, like wind chimes made of crystal, playing a melody that seemed to shift every time you tried to focus on it. Against every instinct that said, "Turn around and take the normal route," Clover found themselves walking the bike down the impossible street. The houses grew more interesting the further in they went. One had a garden where the flowers seemed to sway without any breeze, their petals catching light in ways that created tiny rainbows. Another had wind chimes hanging from the porch that were definitely the source of that impossible music, but instead of metal or wood, they appeared to be made of something that looked like captured moonlight. "This is insane," Clover whispered. A voice from behind made her jump. "First time on Meridian Lane." Clover spun around to find an elderly woman tending to a garden that definitely hadn't been there 30 seconds ago. She was normal-looking enough, silver hair, dirt-stained gardening gloves, the kind of comfortable clothes that suggested someone who spent a lot of time outdoors. But her plants, the tomatoes were blue, not a sickly blue, but a vibrant, healthy blue that somehow looked as natural as red would have back on Maple Avenue. "I'm sorry," Clover said, "but I don't understand. This street wasn't here yesterday. I ride this route every Saturday." The woman smiled, pulling off her gloves. "Oh, it's always been here, dear. You just weren't ready to see it until now." Ready to see it? Some people live their whole lives taking the same route every day, never noticing the side paths. She gestured to her impossible garden. Others start paying attention to what's actually around them instead of just where they're going. Meridian Lane has been waiting for someone like you. Clover looked back toward where Maple Avenue should be, but couldn't see it anymore. Not because it was hidden, but because it genuinely seemed to not exist from this perspective. Like looking at a photograph where someone had carefully erased part of the background. Someone like me? Someone who notices things, who sees the details everyone else misses. The woman picked one of her blue tomatoes and offered it to Clover. Someone who's ready for their route to be an adventure instead of just a way to get somewhere. The tomato was warm in Clover's palm, and despite its impossible color, it smelled exactly like summer should smell. Rich and earthy and full of possibilities. "What is this place?" Clover asked. "It's the place between where you were and where you're going," the woman said. "The scenic route, you might say. Most people are so focused on their destination that they miss all the interesting stops along the way." Clover took a small bite of the blue tomato. It tasted like the best tomato they'd ever had, but with an undertone of something indefinable, like the feeling of discovering a new favorite song or finding a perfect hiding spot. "Will I be able to find it again?" The woman's smile was knowing. "That depends. Are you going to keep your eyes open, or go back to just getting from point A to point B?" Somewhere in the direction where normal street should be, Clover could hear the sounds of regular Saturday morning. Cars starting, dogs barking, the distant hum of lawnmowers. The familiar world, waiting patiently. "I should probably get to work," Clover said, though they didn't really want to leave. "Of course. But remember, there's always more than one way to get somewhere. And sometimes the interesting routes show up when you need them most." Clover climbed back onto their bike, the blue tomato carefully tucked into their jacket pocket. As they pedaled toward the sound of normal Saturday morning, Meridian Lane seemed to fade behind them, not disappearing, but becoming translucent, like a reflection in water when clouds pass over. By the time Clover reached the familiar corner where Mrs. Chen's coffee shop sat, everything looked exactly as it always had. Same red mailbox with the dented side, same cracked sidewalk, same route they'd taken dozens of times before, but something had changed. Not the world, Clover. Every detail seemed sharper now, more present. The way morning light hit the windows just so, the particular shade of green in Mrs. Chen's window boxes, the sound their bike tires made on different types of pavement. At turning pages, Clover's co-worker Marcus looked up from sorting returns. "You're glowing," he said. "Good ride this morning?" Clover touched the blue tomato in their pocket, still warm and impossible. "Yeah," they said, grinning. "I think I found a shortcut." But they both knew it hadn't been shorter at all. It had been exactly as long as it needed to be. The end.